standing outside that house in the Tucson darkness. She already knew what was inside. And what she found, working through the evidence, the footage, the forensic reports, the ransom notes, the behavioral patterns, the digital trail, what she found in this case is something that will disturb you in a way that no photograph ever could.
And what they did not say. The ransom notes in the Nancy Guthrie case were not sent to law enforcement alone. They were not sent quietly to the family through a private channel the way a genuine negotiation requires. They were sent to TMZ, to national broadcast networks, to news organizations with millions of daily viewers who would consume and share and amplify every word within hours of receiving them. Think about that decision for a moment. A person whose primary motivation is financial, who takes someone in order to secure a payment, negotiates privately. They keep the communication contained. They minimize the public attention that dramatically increases the risk of law enforcement pressure and the probability of getting caught. They do not send correspondence to entertainment news outlets and television networks. They do not perform, but whoever sent these ransom notes was performing. Coffindaffer's analysis was cold and precise, and it landed with the weight of someone who has seen genuine ransom communications and knows exactly what they look like when the money is real. She said that public perception had been exceedingly important to the Guthrie family.
But Coffindaffer noted something that most people watching the news coverage missed entirely. The rear doors of that home were found propped open. Not broken, not forced, propped. As in, someone had deliberately left them open before the abduction.
And she said the person behind these notes seemed to understand that. Deeply, personally. To understand that public perception matters enormously to this specific family. To understand that a national audience would be watching Savannah Guthrie's every word and every silence. To understand that the public nature of the ransom demand would create a pressure the family could not manage quietly behind closed doors. You would need to know this family in a way that watching them on television does not provide. You would need to have sat at their table. And then there was the absence. In any kidnapping case where the person responsible genuinely wants to be paid, proof of life is not optional. It is the mechanism that makes the negotiation function. It is the evidence that the person taken is still alive, still reachable, still worth the money being demanded. Without proof of life, there is nothing to negotiate. There is no credible leverage. There is no reason for a family or law enforcement to take the demand seriously as a genuine transaction. The Nancy Guthrie ransom notes contained no proof of life. None. Coffindaffer's interpretation of that absence is the darkest verdict in this entire investigation.
Jennifer Coffindafer had learnt that the difference between a stranger crime and a targeted crime is visible in the first 3 seconds of surveillance footage. And what she saw on Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera, the deliberate downward tilt of the head, the direct path to the device, the zero hesitation, told her everything she needed to know.
She said the notes, the way they were written, the way they were distributed, the complete absence of any credible proof of life mechanism, pointed to someone who was not genuinely expecting to negotiate. Someone who already knew the outcome. Someone whose real objective was never the $6 million in Bitcoin. The objective was the public humiliation of a family. The objective was to make Savannah Guthrie stand in front of cameras and look helpless. To force a media spectacle that the family could not escape and could not control. To use the most public possible platform to do to this family something that money could never accomplish. Destroy them in plain sight. That is a specific kind of goal. It is not the goal of a stranger motivated by opportunistic financial gain. It is the goal of someone with a grievance. Someone with history. Someone who had decided that a family they knew needed to be taken apart in the most visible and painful way possible, and who built an entire operation around making that happen. Coffindaffer had seen that psychology before, and she had a name for it. She called it a God complex. The language embedded in the ransom notes, specific phrasing that behavioral analysts flagged as unlike standard ransom communication.
Coffindaffer's assessment of that 16-minute window was direct. She said this level of speed, this level of control, this level of operational precision, it does not happen without knowledge. Knowledge of the layout, knowledge of Nancy's physical limitations, knowledge of exactly what route to use to move her out of that property as quickly, and as quietly as possible.
Pointed to someone who believed they were operating above consequence. Someone whose confidence in the perfection of their own plan had crossed a line from arrogance into something closer to a belief that the rules simply did not apply to them. That psychology has a behavioral signature. A person with a God complex does not go quiet when the pressure builds. They push back. They make moves they do not need to make. They cannot help themselves because the need to demonstrate superiority over investigators, over the family, over the watching public, compels them to act even when silence would serve them better. The ransom notes going to TMZ was the act of someone who believed they could not be caught. The propped rear door, the deliberate preparation executed with quiet confidence rather than panic, was the act of someone who believed the plan was airtight. The digital reconnaissance conducted on a traceable device connected to a traceable account was the act of someone who believed that level of trail would never matter. And Jennifer Coffindafer has watched that belief destroy people before. She watched the Pima County Sheriff's handling of this case with the same trained precision she brought to everything else.
Here is where Coffindaffer's verdict becomes something that most people covering this case have not been willing to fully say out loud. She said it, clearly, on the record. I don't think this is a solo operation.
And what she saw in those early hours was not just a missed opportunity. She called it something much more specific. She called it a failure that cannot be undone. The crime scene at Nancy Guthrie's home was left unsecured in the hours immediately following the discovery of the disappearance. A national television crew, journalist Brian Entin and his team, walked up to that front door and knocked on it the way someone knocks on a door during a routine news assignment. The evidence at the front of the property, including the blood on the doorstep that would later be confirmed as Nancy's, was accessible to anyone who approached. Coffindaffer's reaction was not academic. It was the response of a professional who understood exactly what had just been lost. She said it plainly. There are no do-overs in crime scenes. Whatever physical evidence existed at that property in the first 12 hours, whatever trace materials and footprints and contact evidence survived the initial event, was potentially compromised by the absence of proper scene security in a window of time that can never be recovered. And then the DNA. A glove was recovered approximately 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. A glove that appeared consistent with the gloves worn by the masked figure in the doorbell footage. That glove was processed. An unknown male DNA profile was recovered from it. A profile that did not match anyone in the federal database. Instead of sending that evidence to the FBI laboratory at Quantico, the most advanced forensic facility in the country with analytical capabilities that no private laboratory can replicate, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos sent it to a private lab in Florida. 11 weeks passed. 11 weeks during which the most critical piece of physical evidence in this investigation sat in the wrong building while an 84-year-old woman who required daily medication to manage her heart condition remained missing from her home. Coffindaffer did not soften her assessment. She called it what it was. A failure of professional judgment that cost this investigation weeks it could not afford to lose. Weeks that belonged to Nancy Guthrie. Weeks that should have been spent following the DNA profile through the most advanced processing pipeline in American law enforcement. Instead, 11 weeks. And then, after public pressure, after congressional attention, after Sheriff Nanos was questioned under oath about the decisions made in the early days of this investigation, the evidence finally arrived at Quantico. Coffindaffer's response to that moment was not relief. It was a statement of what it actually meant. She said the FBI was starting from scratch. Not picking up where the local investigation left off. Not building on a foundation. Starting over, from nothing, in a case where every day carried real weight. But here is where something shifted. Here is where Jennifer Coffindafer, who had spent weeks watching a public narrative build around the idea that this investigation was cooling off, losing momentum, running out of leads, drew a line. She went on record and she pushed back with everything she had. She said this case is not cold. She said it will never be cold as long as Nancy Guthrie is missing. And she explained exactly why. Not in general terms, not in the language of reassurance. In the specific, technical language of someone who understands what is actually happening inside the investigation that the public cannot see. The FBI had DNA at Quantico being processed through probabilistic genotyping software. This is not a standard database comparison. This technology does not simply look for an existing match in a federal catalog. It builds statistical models from complex mixture samples and isolates individual contributor profiles with mathematical precision that was not available to investigators a decade ago. It can work with partial samples, degraded samples, mixed samples that traditional methods cannot untangle. It is extraordinarily powerful, and it was running on the DNA recovered from that glove. The FBI had cell tower data being assembled by the Bureau's Cell Site Analysis Unit, a specialized team that reconstructs the digital footprint of every mobile device active in a geographic area during a specific window of time. Every phone that was in the vicinity of the Catalina foothills on the night of January 31st and the early morning of February 1, 2026, is present in that dataset. Every movement, every signal ping, every record of where those devices were and what time they were there. That data does not lie. The FBI had the Google subpoena results. The IP address data connected to the image searches in March 2025 and November 2025. The device, the account, the digital fingerprint of whoever sat at a keyboard and researched Nancy Guthrie's home address in 2 separate sessions across 10 months. And the FBI had the Bitcoin wallet. The trail that blockchain forensics teams never lose because the record is permanent and every connected address is visible forever. 4 separate threads, DNA, cell towers, IP address records, blockchain, any one of them, pulled at the right moment, leads somewhere. And Coffindaffer said something in her public commentary that law enforcement sources had confirmed but had not stated openly. She said that law enforcement had known who the subject of this investigation was for some time. Not suspected, known. Let that land. They knew. The reason no arrest had been made was not because the trail had gone cold or the leads had dried up or the investigation had stalled the way the media narrative suggested. The reason was precision. The evidence being built at Quantico, the DNA analysis, the digital records, the financial trail, the behavioral profile, needed to be constructed so carefully and so completely that when it was placed in front of a grand jury, no attorney, no matter how experienced or how resourced, could dismantle it. Because the person at the center of this case, the orchestrator behind the masked figure who appeared at Nancy Guthrie's front door at 1:47 in the morning, is someone who will have resources. Who will have legal representation of the highest order. Who will have a public platform from which to challenge every piece of evidence presented against them. Coffindaffer was not going to let this case fall apart because the timeline moved faster than the evidence. She had watched that happen before. She was not going to watch it happen here. And the God complex that drove the orchestrator to send ransom notes to TMZ, to leave a digital trail across 2 search sessions 10 months apart, to conduct an operation of this precision with an arrogance that suggested they believed they were simply beyond reach, that same psychology was now working against them. Coffindaffer had said it clearly. People with a God complex always make one error. One moment where the belief that they are untouchable leads them to do something that careful, frightened people never do. One move that hands investigators exactly what they need. The DNA they did not account for. The cell tower ping they did not think about. The blockchain transaction they believed was invisible. The IP address on the device they used to study a house they already knew. One of those threads is going to pull. Coffindaffer has watched it happen across 28 years. She has seen the moment when someone who believed they had built the perfect plan discovers that the plan had a seam. And when that seam opens, everything behind it comes through. As of the time this story is told, it has been 95 days since Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her home in Tucson, Arizona. She is 84 years old. She requires medication to manage her heart condition. She used a walker to move through the rooms of the house she had lived in for years. And every single night until February 1, 2026, her pacemaker transmitted its data at exactly 2:28 in the morning, a small and faithful signal that she was still there, still breathing, still present. That transmission missed its window on the morning she was taken. And it has not transmitted from her bedroom since. Jennifer Coffindafer has not walked away from this case. She has not accepted the silence. She has not let the public narrative drift toward the comfortable assumption that nothing more is coming. She continues to analyze. She continues to speak. She continues to do what 28 years inside the FBI trained her to do, which is to follow the evidence wherever it leads and refuse to stop until it gets there. Her verdict on this investigation is not delivered in the language of hope. It is delivered in the language of professional certainty. She said finding Nancy alive was objective 1. Objective 2, she said, is getting an individual who is responsible for this off the streets. That is not speculation. That is the professional assessment of a retired FBI special agent who has looked at every publicly available piece of evidence in this case and reached a conclusion that she is willing to put her name on. The investigation is not over. New evidence is being processed at Quantico right now. The blockchain forensics team is working the Bitcoin wallet. The cell tower data is being cross-referenced. The Google subpoena results are in the Bureau's hands. And somewhere in that layered, patient, methodical construction of an airtight case, a thread is being pulled that the orchestrator behind this crime never believed anyone would find. But Jennifer Coffindafer found it. She found the seam. And in the next video, this channel will take you through something that has not been fully examined in public coverage of this case. The specific identity of the person law enforcement has had in focus, the behavioral evidence that Coffindaffer says points in one direction without ambiguity, and the detail buried inside the ransom note language that a behavioral analyst flagged as the single most revealing piece of evidence in this entire investigation. It is the detail that, once you hear it, changes everything you thought you understood about why Nancy Guthrie was taken. You cannot afford to miss that video. Subscribe, turn on notifications. Nancy Guthrie deserves to be found.